all what we are about to learn and revisit. Most importantly, dear Lord, we ask you that you guide the mind and heart of our dear friend Kirsten, who will bring to us the teachings of times of health in our lives. We are thankful for this beautiful opportunity, this banquet of love that we partake and share here in both realms of life. And with your guidance, protection, and permission, we open this meeting. So be it. So we would like to give a continuation, right, Kirsten, to this beautiful study of the book Times of Health and Conscientiousness by Joanna de Angelis. Give a continuation to the second part of the book today, chapter 11, entitled Conscientiousness and Evolution. With no further ado, please, Kirsten, guide us way.
Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up, Leo. I can see you. Just give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me? Yes? I'll take that as a yes. I heard no nays. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of this live broadcast, whether in person or over the web. It's always an honor. It's always a pleasure to discuss this topic. So today, as Leo had already shared, we are continuing on this series, part 2 of this book, Times of Health and Conscientiousness, part 2, chapter 11, Conscientiousness and Evolution. And as we prepared for this lecture and have contemplated for quite some time about how to approach this, and we're taking a page from some of the great masters in history, which is teaching through storytelling. So we're going to do a little bit of that. And I stressed a little bit. But when thinking about conscientiousness and evolution, we wanted to paint a picture for us to best grasp what that is, what that looks like, and its complexities, because we are, after all, we are complex beings, if you will. Simple in a sense, but yet very complex. So although I may not be seeing you, but you can virtually drop an emoji in the chat in response to anything I'm saying, or if I give you prompts, please feel free to do so. So I am curious if anyone here, whether listening on the web or in person, has ever heard that story from the Bible or just through word of mouth. The story of when Jesus his feet were washed by the sinful woman, let's call her that, in the book Jesus in the Home. And this is the story we want to utilize today as a sort of framework to understanding conscientiousness and evolution. And evolution in the sense that, in the broader sense of the word, and as we evolve as immortal spirits. I digress. In the book Jesus in the Home, I believe it's chapter 17, I have it in one of my slides, which I'll show soon. They detail, much like in a lot of that particular book, when Jesus is with the disciples at visiting one of the homes, one of the disciples. And during after one of his, moments of reflection with the disciples, herein comes this well-known unclean woman of the town. Now, historically, or some historians, biblical historians, paint this woman as what we might call in modern day terms a harlot or a prostitute. It also could have meant someone who just was unmarried at that time of Jesus, who kept the company of men, even if it just was walking in the square or walking in the local square or local area, because at that time, the the role of women and what they could and could not do and how they were viewed by society was very harsh. So, we digress. This woman was viewed pretty harshly. She was looked at as a very sinful woman. So you have to imagine this woman was well aware of how she was viewed in this particular town she lived in. So for her to walk into this home of one of the disciples where they were gathered, where Jesus was speaking, was a great leap of courage, a bit of tenacity, but a great deal of humility and desire for herself to be better and to just be close to the Messiah. And let's take this even further when we think about this particular case. Oftentimes when people went to visit Jesus, even until today, as we pray to Jesus, as we pray to our spirit benefactors, as we pray to God, usually we're asking for something. We're praying for health. We're praying to win the lottery. We are praying for our families, for a situation. And none of those things are wrong. Not at all. But this is the interesting piece to this story. This sinful woman, again, quotations as she's known as, doesn't go there specifically to just ask and take from Jesus. No. She goes there recognizing the grandiosity of Jesus. She goes there and does what? She does what she can to want to give homage, to bless this spiritual man, this Jesus, by washing his feet. A great symbol at that time of service to one another. But she doesn't just go there to wash his feet with just water. Some texts say she brings ointment and things to perfume and give good aroma. And in this story, we have an interesting depiction of our evolution as human beings, as immortal souls. Because this woman had lived a life, some would say, of impropriety, of lavishness, of impropriety, of just a lot of iniquity, if you will. A lot of things that were frowned upon, to put in layman's terms, especially for that time. So no one liked her in this room. They were whispers as people walked in that room. But she went there with a renewed heart, wanting to change, wanting to be different. Now, to the extent of her life, we're not going to get into. But know this, the symbolism in this interaction is profound for all of us. And it's symbolic of this woman's awakening to her own conscientiousness and a reflection of our ability to evolve from what we were to what we could be. And that's something extremely powerful that we're going to talk about today. Because unlike what happens to a lot of us, which is we allow what we have done in our past to weigh us down, this particular woman decided she wanted to change her life, follow Jesus to the best of her ability, and not just that, she wanted to give back to him something and honor him. So it also, as an added note, makes us wonder, how are we giving honor to our Creator, to Jesus? In the same way we might reflect when we talk about honoring our parents. How do we honor our parents? What do we do? One of the things is living a righteous life, living the best way we can. and helping them in some way. But we digress. That is not the full reflection of today. But thinking about this woman and her actions and how we are not unlike her. So, going to this particular chapter, Evolution and Conscientiousness. When we talk about evolution, when we talk about how we evolve, in some modern terms of psychology, there's this idea of nature versus nurture, like what makes us become who we are. So there's the idea of nature. So our genes, our hereditary factors, and even today there are aspects of epigenetics as well that gets involved. And then there's the nurture. There's the aspect of the environmental variables, which would be the epigenetics and childhood experiences, how we were raised, social relationships, and our surrounding culture. But one aspect, obviously not included here, that we are inserting from Spiritist perspective is the fact that we are immortal spirits, and we carry from one life to the next these atavistic behaviors, these old behaviors that we carry with us, that sort of stay with us, habits that we have formed over millennia, centuries, that we've done so many times. Habits can be hard to break, not impossible, just difficult. So something for us to think about when we're thinking about our evolution, and as we awaken to our conscientiousness, we are faced with ourselves ultimately. Of course, also acknowledging these other factors that can come into play, as well as the spiritual factor, the spirits that we attract, that we're surrounding us, whether incarnate or discarnate. There's always that aspect as well. But Joanna really drills down in this particular chapter that ultimately it starts and ends with us and our own personal responsibility, much like this sinful woman, quote unquote, or this wayward woman who decides to make a change in her life and fully commit to following Jesus, and gives this outward demonstration and almost humiliates herself in a sense. But it's this great leap of faith in herself and God that she moves forward, and it's the same way in which we should be shifting and moving forward. And we're going to talk about that. Joanna starts out this chapter reminding us of the following: that awakening to conscientiousness promotes responsibility for one's acts due to the blossoming of the divine codes that lie in seed form within the individual. So as we become more aware, we realize our responsibilities. That innate knowing comes into play. And as we know, we are created simple and ignorant. Joanna reminds us the spirit is destined for perfection. Attaining too quickly or slowly depends on its own desire and free will. So we are in charge of how fast we go. She continues, having passed through the dye of ignorance, it acquires experiences by which it can discern between what it should and should not do, opting for actions that bring about happiness and well-being without harmful effects. In this way, it becomes responsible for its destiny, which it is building and modifying by means of its decisions and attitudes. So going through different experiences are what help us determine what we should and should not do. And this is a great reminder, because Spiritism never says, don't do this, don't do that. It never says we can't do this. It simply informs us what we should and should not do, because we become aware of the consequences. And then we make the decisions, bearing in mind the consequences that come after those decisions. And we will, through trial and error, like balancing on a balancing beam, find our balance, figure out what works for us that causes the least amount of harm to ourselves and others. So then we become artists of our own destiny. And as Ralph Waldo Emerson is quoted having written, the only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be. And we make that decision day in and day out. Even with the smallest of decisions, we are deciding upon who we wish to be. But the beauty in that is I may have made a set of decisions and taken action. But the moment I come to the realization that that's not who I want to be, I can change. Bearing in mind that some of those actions and reactions, consequences from our past, can linger, sometimes like a ball and weight holding us back. But to what extent is also within our power, and we'll talk about that. But Joanna continues. The inheritance of primitive ignorance attaches the spirit to evil, which is contrary to the law of progress. And this is what we're talking about, that ball and chain. We are our own inheritors of our primitive ignorances, our past decisions from lifetimes ago, where we didn't know any better and we made decisions that weren't in our best interest or in the interest of others, that were downright wrong and hurtful to others and ourselves. So we get wrapped up in that negativity, in those patterns that do not bring us joy but bring us harm. And all of that seems contrary to the law of progress because, well, it's holding me back. But nonetheless, she reminds us, nonetheless, such inheritance does not hold it and keep it from being happy indefinitely. So we might have some struggles. We might have some difficulty. Anytime we seek to change, there's always that older version of ourselves holding us back. Sometimes we say it's hard for us to change and change in the eyes of others because we often take photographs, mental images of one another, and we never truly allow one another or a particular person to be anything other than that photo we take of them. But as much as that happens on the external, that happens on the internal. I'll say that again. As much as that happens on the external, where we take photographs of one another and don't allow others to change, that happens on the internal, facing ourselves. We take photographs of ourselves, sometimes quite literally, but I mean this in a metaphorical sense or in a mental sense. We take these mental images of who we are and then don't quite ever allow ourselves to step outside of that image. Whether that image is, an image of just being a daughter, just being a friend, or an image of just being one particular way. And to us, that particular way isn't bad, but there's so much else and other aspects of us to embrace, to discover, greater virtues to discover. Something for us to think about. And in the Genesis, they remind us as we talk about, quote unquote, good and evil in chapter 3 of Genesis, they say, since humans must progress, the ills to which they are exposed are a stimulus for exercising their intelligence and all their physical and mental capabilities, thereby inciting them to search for the means to avoid them. In other words, or restating this first, the ills to which they are exposed are a stimulus for exercising their intelligence and all their physical and mental capabilities, inciting them to search for the means to avoid them. So when we are exposed to challenges, we are forced to think critically. How do I combat this? How do I overcome this? That entail develops our intellect. If any of you have ever had the chance to raise children or are an educator where you've observed children through different developmental processes, you can kind of see a little bit of this. You can begin to see when the child goes from being a toddler to around 5 or 6, going into age 7, you see their critical thinking skills begin to develop. And they begin to develop more and more as they are confronted with some obstacles. Now, I'm oversimplifying this. There's a lot more complexity to that. But for the sake of this conversation, we'll put it in this way. But we can see this in our own children when they are given something complex to work with, and how they work at it and end up developing a greater part of their brain and their intellect because of that struggle. We've seen this throughout history. We've seen this in many circumstances, especially in the areas of war, when times have caused civilizations and societies to really push them to their limits. They were able to create a lot of different ways in which were, let's say, in layman's terms, better for humanity and our progress. Creating new ways of manufacturing, industrialization, and things of that nature, to put it simply, and not wanting to go too wildly into it. But saying all this to say, Joanna continues, that pain is the goad that drives humans forward on the path of progress. And we see a similar text, a similar idea in the book Action and Reaction, where I believe it is the mentor Druso, or one of the other mentors in the book Action and Reaction, by the spirit Andrea Louise, a psychograph by Chico Xavier. And in that book, they tell us that pain, second to the power of God, is one of the greater forces of the universe and of our reality, because pain pushes us like nothing else. It truly is a catalyst. And oftentimes, some people might joke, there's a famous, I don't know how famous it is, but there's like a story, a famous joke saying about, and some of you might have already heard this, the story of the dog that's like kind of crying a little bit. So a man, I'll tell my rendition of this story. A man walks up to a gas station and sees this golden retriever sitting on the ground, and he's kind of like moaning and kind of like crying a little bit, not too terribly, but a little bit. So the man is walking up to the gas station and he sees the owner standing beside him, and he goes, "Sir, your dog is moaning. Is he okay?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, he's okay." And so the guy was like, "Well, he's crying and moaning. Don't you think you should see what's wrong with him?" He says, "Oh, I know what's wrong with him. I know what's wrong with him." And the guy goes, "Well, what's wrong with him?" So, "Oh, well, he's sitting on a nail." And the guy goes, "He's sitting on a nail? Well, why doesn't he move?" "Oh, because he's not in that much pain. When he's in enough pain, he'll move. Right now, he's just uncomfortable." So this story is applicable to a lot like human beings. We'll stay in situations where are uncomfortable or painful, but only when we're in truly a large amount of pain do we actually take action, make a movement, or move at all. And we could extrapolate this for many other aspects of our lives, but from this perspective alone, that pain truly is what drives us forward onto the path of progress, as Joanna reminds us. But the question remains, here we are, having all this knowledge and this understanding, what can I do? What can I do? Joanna informs us. She says, thus, individuals should strive to break the bonds that hold them back, advancing by means of illuminative experiences, at first with difficulty, given their conditioning, and then more quickly, by force of the resulting pleasure and joy. Individuals should strive to break the bonds that hold them back. Break the bonds, advancing by means of illuminative experiences. She tells us at first it's difficult, but then it gets easier with the fact of positive reinforcement, which is the pleasure and the joy that it gives us when we become better and doing healthier things for ourselves. Health and illness, peace and conflict, joy and sorrow may be chosen through the discernment that guides their actions. Health and illness, peace and conflict, joy and sorrow may be chosen through the discernment that guides their action. So, personal reflection. And I'm going to ask this, and you can drop your comments in the chat. We would love that. Or if anyone there wants to share anything, they can. But personal reflection. What might be some examples of an illuminative experience? So remember, Joanna says, strive to break the bonds that hold us back and advance by means of illuminative or illuminating experiences. So what might that be? Where do I go to have these illuminating experiences? And what would be some examples of that? I pause here for a few seconds. And this can, we can ponder about this in our minds, what some illuminating experiences might look like for us. It'll be different for everyone, for sure, right? Because different things move different people, inspire us differently. But what might that be? And again, I encourage you to share in the comments what might be some examples of an illuminating experience. And as we shared at the beginning of this talk, we mentioned the story of the wayward woman washing Jesus' feet. It's actually chapter 15, I said 17. Chapter 15 in the book Jesus in the Home by Joanna de Angelis and Divaldo Franco. And we bring an excerpt from this particular chapter we wanted to read. And they share the following. In the unforgettable encounter between Jesus and the woman of loose morals, who washed his feet with the ointment of her tears and wiped them with her hair, we find the psychotherapy for all miseries. Jesus said to his host, who mentally criticized him for condoning the attitude of the poor, wretched woman, she has loved much. Consequently, her sins shall be forgiven. Looking at her with tenderness and affection, he instructed, "Go in peace, your faith has saved you." And forgive me, I wrote Joanna de Angelis here. I meant to write Neo Lucio as the spirit who psychographed. I digress. Looking at her with tenderness and affection, he instructed, "Go in peace, your faith has saved you." Love that has been converted into reparation for one's wrongs is the effective remedy for all sores of body, mind, and soul. I'm going to read that again. Love that has been converted into reparation for one's wrongs is the effective remedy for all sores of the mind, of body, mind, and soul. And I'm just going to forgive the late-breaking change of this, but I just want to make sure, in case folks see this later in recordings, they know what is what. So this passage is incredibly moving, incredibly inspiring, to say the least. And he continues and finishes at this: love and be at peace, leaving your pain in the past, and arising from the rubble, resurface, happy and for a sound reconstruction of your life. How powerful is this advice from Jesus? Because this advice is the same advice that he is giving to us every day. When we come to conscientiousness, desire to make a change, and are on that cusp of realizing that I carry those old habits with me, those old atavisms, that ball and chain from the past, and it's heavy and it's hard, and sometimes it trips me up. It can trip us up because, as the famous saying goes, old habits die hard. But he reminds her in this text, go in peace, your faith has saved you. Love that has been converted into reparation for one's wrongs is the effective remedy. Love and be at peace, leaving your pain in the past. Leaving your pain in the past. And arising from the rubble, resurface, happy for a sound reconstruction of your life. This is a great reminder, because sometimes we go through cycles of this, where we're doing great, we're on schedule, we are, doing our positive routine, we're, hitting all of our milestones, our goals that we have for our lives, and then sometimes we have hiccups. We have bumps in the road. And then we sort of fall off the wagon, or we lose sight of what's important. We get distracted. And then we come to those feelings of guilt and we go, oh man, what did I do? I gotta begin again. I gotta start again. And here we are at the Master's feet. And this is what he tells us. Love and be at peace. Your faith has saved you. Leave your pain in the past. Stand up. Resurface. Begin again. Be happy and reconstruct your life. So every time we go through these cycles of when we fall, we make some mistakes, whether they're small or big, in whatever way, get up again. Brush off the dust, Jesus says. Be happy and move on. Leave what's happened in the past. What you've done, you've done. The consequences will be there for sure. But begin again. Move forward. This is an illuminative experience, both for us to witness this, in a sense, by reading the story, hearing of the story told in this way, but also by this woman, this immortal soul, for sure, marked her very existence. For sure, we could safely say this was an experience that will stay with her for all time. And most, if not all, people that crossed pathways with Jesus, he left a mark that is undeniable. You know, his energy alone was enough to change you, to move you. Even the hardest of individuals, something felt different. But we digress. Seeking out such illuminative experiences, Joanna reminds us of this as a means for us to progress forward. So when we are thinking about, oh, what do I want to do this weekend? We're planning our schedules for the summer, even though I think, what are we? Technically, we're into the summer already now, a couple weeks or give or take or what have you. And we're planning ideas, sometimes even 6 months to a year in advance. We're planning holidays, we're planning this, we're planning that, and we're just setting goals for ourselves. Let us not forget to add in deep meaning, purpose, something that can ignite that illuminative process within us. And this isn't always visible on the outside and doesn't need to be. As a matter of fact, this woman, by all accounts, from the disciples' perspective, they were looking at this woman as beneath them and wasting everybody's time. No one for sure looked at her, or probably most did not look at her in that moment and think, oh, well, this is going to be an illuminating experience. Most probably rolled their eyes in that moment, turned their faces. But for this woman, this was a magical experience. And let that be a lesson for us, that our walk with understanding conscientiousness and evolution, putting that into context, our walk and our path of enlightenment, of inner enlightenment, of personal growth, is that it is personal. Only me, myself, and I, and God, and probably my mentor, spiritual mentor, will know what is best for me. So never be afraid to step out on faith and do what is right for us, because it looks different for everyone. But Joanna, in this book, as she always does, she grants us this blessing of what we like to call sort of reminders for our lives. Because life is challenging, life can be hard, life is full of amazing things, amazing experiences to be had. But it's also okay to say that life can be a struggle. That doesn't take away from the joys and beauty of life. We can say life is hard, life can be challenging, life can be beautiful. But if life weren't challenging, if life and our experiences weren't hard, souls like Joanna wouldn't be giving us these reminders that I'm going to read here in a moment, in a second. Life is hard. That's okay. We all struggle. Unless you're a perfect spirit, which I don't know why you'd be watching this talk if you were, or even on this earth for that matter. But for most of us, if not all of us, life can be challenging. But Joanna, she comes and she reminds us, never, ever give in to despair or surrender. And I want to do a little sidebar here, real quick. Because sometimes our language, whether it's the English language or human language, sometimes lacks the ability to fully express all of what the higher minds wish to express. And we read this through other texts in Spiritism. So when you see the word surrender, I want us to be gracious in that understanding, because surrender can also be positive when we are surrendering to the will of God. But here, in this context, when Joanna says, never give in to despair or surrender, she means in the totality of just giving up and to never do that. And it is quite easy that when pain and anguish knocks on our door, there's almost a desire to just give in to that despair because it's tiring and it's weighing on us, or it can weigh on us. But once we give into that despair, it's so much harder for us to get out of that despair. It's harder for those around us to help us. It's harder for our guardian angel to help us. It's hard for us to get out of that headspace. So in essence, we make everything so much more difficult for us when we give in to despair. That's not to say that we can't express sorrow or anguish or express if we are going through pain of any sort. But despair is the bottom of the abyss where you don't see any bottom. Much like in the book Alice in Wonderland, where she falls down the rabbit hole and she's just falling and falling and falling and falling. If you remember watching that cartoon, the animation as a child, it just seemed like she was falling forever. And that's kind of what the image of what despair, you just constantly like there's no end. Never give in to that. And we make this emphasis because suicide is at an all-time high. And we shouldn't give in to that. And continues reminding us, you are not a rolling stone on the bed of the river of fate. You have a goal that awaits you, and you will reach it. This is another great reminder. We will reach our goals. Continue to work hard towards them. There will come a time when we will reach our Mount Everest, if you will. She continues, through deep reflection, you will uncover your incalculable potential for self-realization. Deep reflection. How much time throughout our day do we set aside, if at all, consciously or unconsciously, if we were to do an inventory, do we set aside for deep reflection? Or throughout our day, sprinkled? Do we deeply reflect about things? Because it is through that we will realize our own potential to be self-realized. And self-realization here, because Joanna often brings a lot of Carl Gustav Jung's thought processes as a psychologist, psychiatrist in the arena of psychology, and self-realization being the apex of reaching all that we could possibly be, being the best versions of ourselves. So uncovering our potential to be our best selves, in other words here. Affirm yourself in the good, she says, so that its seed may be fertilized and grow within you. Affirm yourself in the good so that its seed may be fertilized and grow within you. You will be what you think and plan for. You will be what you think and plan for, since the qualities you cultivate proceed from your heart and mind. I was just having this conversation recently with someone about two things. One, that what we think about, we bring about. And two, how that could be potentially dangerous if I ascribe to such beliefs as, or allow myself to fall into the habit of, well, I'm just thinking about it, I wouldn't act on it. Many people do this, whether they are being unfaithful with their eyes, whether they are thinking bad things about other people and wishing them harm, but they would never actually do anything, but they're thinking about it. And how detrimental that can be. We are what we think and plan for. Since the qualities you cultivate proceed from your heart and mind, everything starts within our heart and mind. That's why the desire to change is important, to want to change. And I'll give you another example of this, something that's perhaps maybe more tangible. If you ever want to lose weight, and forgive the example, I'll actually tell you who told me this. My mother told me this many times, like many years and years ago. She gave the suggestion, and I heard it from a psychologist years later as well, to imagine yourself as you would like to be. Imagine yourself, so for in this instance, skinny. Or if you want to be a particular type of way. So let's say, for instance, you want to become a pharmacist, or you want to become a doctor, or you want to become an archaeologist, or you want to become a teacher, or whatever it is that you set your goals to, or you want to become a better person. You want to gossip less. You want to be kinder to your neighbors. You want to be friendlier. Already see yourself in your mind as that. Because our mind is a powerful tool. And what we think about, we can bring about. So putting our energy towards that is also imperative, and a great reminder from Joanna at that. But she goes on to say some additional things. She says, your constitution is harmonious. Imbalances are instances in the electric current of the nervous system due to the distortion of the charge fostered by cultivated sensations. In other words, we cause imbalances, and we can feel them throughout our nervous system. So she reminds us, be vigilant. Keep the vigilance switch turned on so that it may prevent the high voltage that produces such distortions. So let's be aware of our thoughts and our behaviors. But she reminds us, even still, at your origin, you are light, evolving toward the great light. There is darkness only because you have not yet decided to set in motion the mighty power generators of energy asleep within you. Turn on the light, starting with the spark of goodwill, letting it grow to reach maximum power. Love is your pathway because it comes from God who created you. Thus, allow your aspirations to embrace the vertical life and expand your sentiments in the direction of the first cause. The vertical life, meaning our relationship between us and this divine creator. Love is our pathway that comes from God. And I'll give you something that, for those 80s babies, we grew up here in America anyway, watching a cartoon called Rainbow Bright. Rainbow Bright. You can Google that. You can look on YouTube for the old 80s cartoon. It's one of our favorites. But why I bring this up? In this particular cartoon, there always was this rainbow that she could ride to go wherever she needed to go. So whenever I think of this text, that love is your pathway because it comes from God, I think of this bright light, this rainbow, this wave that serves as a pathway for us to achieve our goals. It's always in existence. It's always there, reminding us it is always an option for us to move forward. And always in this particular part 2 of this book, Joanna ends with one of the questions from the Spirit's book, question 117, for us to reflect on. Does it depend on spirits themselves to hasten their cement toward perfection? And the good spirits respond, absolutely. The amount of time it takes them depends on their desire and submission to God's will. Doesn't a well-behaved child learn faster than one who is obstinate? Absolutely. Remember, we mentioned the word surrender before. We can surrender to negativity, or we can surrender to God. There's a great passage in the Gospel According to Spiritism, this chapter, entitled Obedience and Resignation. It is a beautiful chapter, highly recommend. It's not terribly long. It's actually a short message. Short meaning it's not many pages. Maybe it's like a page or two, give or take. Don't judge me if I'm wrong. But nonetheless, it's a beautiful message about surrendering or submission to God's will. In essence, it's a way to look at life to say, don't be rebellious. Don't fall into despair. You know, when things happen and we experience challenges, go with it. Try to adjust. Do your best. We do our best, but do your best. See and ask ourselves, what can I learn from this? How can I move on from this and use this for my own betterment? So I am the author of my own happiness, how fast I evolve and reach that happiness. And as a great reminder, again, from this chapter, we are beloved children of God. Beloved. Always and forever. no matter what we have done, no matter how many mistakes we made in this life or past life, it does not matter. It has consequences. But in terms of us finding our happiness, it's not a end all to be all. We still can find reparation. We can find joy. And as a reminder, and we often forget, and we're so often far removed from his story of Paul the Apostle, Saul who became Paul. We're so far removed, whether it's because it's a really old story, but he was a murderer. He orchestrated many deaths. We forget the heaviness of that. We forget how awful that is. But we point that out because Saul, who became Paul, made a transformation of all transformations. So we always think, man, if he could do it, why wouldn't any of us be able to do it? We're no different in the sense that God gives us all the opportunity to progress, to become better. And if Saul can come back from that, if he was able to be this great apostle, revered, not in the beginning, the disciples didn't like him, didn't trust him. He had a hard ways to go to prove himself in a sense. But man, oh man, talk about somebody doing a 180. That would be Saul who became Paul. And many others. That's just one that just came to mind. So friends, we thank you so much for your time and listening to us. And I will turn it back over to Leo.
Thank you so much for this amazing reminder that you bring to all of us, right? In this idea of evolution, it's certainly
right? So that we can evolve. And Joanna de Angelis was with these reminders, right? With this taps in our back saying, please go forward, right? Let's go forward. And I think this is, at any time of our lives, we find ourselves in this position, in this condition, right? That we are working so hard to evolve and to change. Yet there is always the past connected with us. I certainly have a question, but as always, I would like to pass the word for those here. If we have a comment, a question that you would like to share, and we do have some comments, some questions online as well. Anyone, I would like to start from here. Anyone would like to say anything? Paula, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirsten. That was beautiful. I'm curious about self-reflection. If that is an innate trait, maybe easier for introverts, and is it necessary for those who are not prone to self-reflection to develop it while they're on the earth?
That's a fantastic question, Paula. Thank you for posing it. I'm definitely not an expert on introverts or extroverts, although this topic was discussed recently, so it has been on our minds. But as someone who has more experience as an introvert, I can say that we may be more inclined to inner reflection, but not necessarily in the most positive of sense. Sometimes introversion can also be more of a leaning towards just caring about our own selves and not necessarily wanting to be better, just more perhaps maybe in the egotistical way. But stating that, and that's not my area of expertise, perhaps, but I will say that just as a mortal spirit, just as people, we can try to begin to practice more of inner reflection or deeper reflections. And there nowadays, with Pinterest, with YouTube, with social media, there's so many free resources to help prompt us into deeper reflection, whether it's journal prompts or meditations, or just reading literature during our gospel at home, having those conversations with those who live with us, or, attending certain spiritual meetings such as this one, where we're having a dialogue and we are deeply reflecting, or just having our own habits at home of reading and reflecting and writing and journaling, or even just talking with a friend about certain topics that promote this deep reflection. And the only way for us to know or to gauge that is for us to do it and to see, where we are at, and, how much we need to do more of it, or just need more practice on it. I think it's definitely a behavior that can be learned, and no matter where you are on the spectrum of the level of practice, it's always good to do more of it. I don't think it's ever a bad thing necessarily to do too much reflection unless we are hyper fixated on something and unable to actually take action and live. But to reflect and to think about, some of us might be more inclined towards it. But in the end, the best thing for us to do is just to try and practice it. I think that was the gist of what you were asking, Paul. I hope I answered it. Thank you so much again for asking it.
Thank you, Kirsten. Daniel.
So I have a question, Kirsten. Regards to the question that you have made about the illuminative or illuminated experiences that you asked to us to think about it. So one of the things that came to my mind is like sometime we go to experiences that moment we are experience is not illuminative, it's not good. But later in life, when you look at back, we see that moment as something positive. Although when you leave that moment was not positive, was painful, was very hard to accept. What do you think? Can we also rename that experience that was as an illuminative or illuminated experience?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, we can do that. And even at times, I think about, when we are having conversations with one another, with people, with our friends, or even at our respective place of where we worship, or spiritual centers or church or what have you, and having conversations about the difficulties we endure. And I remember someone specifically asking someone about something that I knew was probably going to be challenging for them. But, we wanted to ask and check in with them, see how they were doing, and fully expecting this person to say, oh man, it was horrible and it's bad and it was terrible. When I asked them how the experience was, how they're doing, they smiled and simply said, it was an illuminating experience. So I always remembered that, because I remember thinking how profound that was. Because it wasn't, not that it's wrong to say, man, that sucked, it was hard, I hated it. But this person, I could see, had deeply reflected about this already, and half in jest and half serious, saying it was illuminating. It was hard, it was difficult, but it really made me think. So yes, definitely, of course, challenging experiences, as we reflect on them, oftentimes after the fact, and if we are really, really good, and really, really good in the sense that really good at overcoming the difficulties in the moment and our own emotions surrounding it, and are able to kind of overcome and put that aside and just really see what is the lesson there, then it's truly illuminative sooner rather than later. But oftentimes it's later when we reflect on difficult situations and go, I learned so much from that. It was illuminating. So thank you for that, Daniel.
We do have a question, then you will post it on here. Yvonne Bernard says, for me, it was the introduction to Spiritism. It changed my life. And then Orlando Gray says, do we know anything more about this woman? Who she went on to be? Future existence? I think he's referring to the women. Yeah, you got it.
This is a great question, Orlando. And I don't know. I would love to know. I can look and get back to you because I'm curious myself to know more about her, who she was. But I don't know.
How she was affected by this personal encounter with Jesus.
From what we know from the text and perhaps from a few other texts, I have to look again. It's been a while. In the book Good News, that was recently published in English. I want to say by the spirit was, I think it was Brother X, Humberto Campos. Yeah. And by Chico Xavier, the medium. I want to say in that book they talk about this wayward woman, and they might give more into detail. I can look, Orlando, and get back to you. But those are great questions to ask. I mean, anytime we're reading or learning something and it brings up more questions, I say that's awesome because it piques our curiosity, and it's interesting to see human behavior. But I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you other than that. But thank you for asking it, Orlando.
And he
India
says,
Ari. Yeah.
Kirsten, you can read.
India Ari. I love this particular singer. For those of you who aren't familiar with who she is, she's been a singer since, I don't know, well, forever. She was more popular in the 2000s. But her music tends to be very meaningful, uplifting, and deeply spiritual. I do know the song you're referring to. It is beautiful, and thank you for reminding me of that. So I think we'll go on to a question from Yasko. She says, hi, Kirsten. Great topic. Joanna reminds, quote, health and illness, peace and conflict, joy and sorrow may be chosen through discernment. So Yaso's question is, so how to be conscientious, to apply the moral, ethical discernment in our daily decisions without the need of pain or suffering. So how to be conscientious, to apply the moral, ethical discernment in our daily decisions without the need of pain and suffering. So how can we apply moral and ethical discernment without pain and suffering? If I understand your question correctly, I think that, it sort of goes hand in hand. Sometimes it's because we are these immortal, since we live many lifetimes and since we carry, emotional baggage, and we have sort of multiple aspects of ourselves that can be conflicting. So for instance, I want to do better, but a part of me doesn't feel like it. So I want to force myself to go for a walk, but I really don't feel like it. So there's always seems to be in life this dichotomous relationship that we have with ourselves and the world around us. And if we can make peace with that sometimes that just exists, and instead of not wanting or wishing for there to be no pain at all, but learning to sort of work with it and not be such an aversion towards it, but rather utilize that pain as an indicator of where we need to go, or simply where I'm at, or just an acknowledgement that, okay, I know this is hard, this is difficult, but I want to push through, and reminding ourselves of our goal, of our purpose, of what we want to do. So for instance, also another example might be that, okay, I want to be a person that is more present with my children, or is more present with my parents. I want to make more of an effort to have more of a relationship with my siblings, or, even just my neighbor, or just be kinder to my coworkers. So, in the moment of changing a behavior, there's always that sort of blowback of our old behavior, of our sort of default behavior. So as I'm trying to change, it's like, oh, the default wants to come back into play. So it's always like this balancing counterbalance, and just sort of, reminding ourselves again of our purpose, and that pain and suffering can be part of the experience of life. It's not always a bad thing. Again, pain is what motivates us. Pain is it's a reminder to say, I don't want to be that person anymore because I have pain and suffering. I don't want to go that route. And sometimes changing is painful, but that's part of it. It's part of the experience of our lives. Now, how painful something is can also depend on us, on how much I decide to give into despair, or how much I struggle against it, how much I resist versus just flowing instead. So I hope I understood your question correctly, and I gave sufficient enough of an answer, Yasko.
Thank you, Kirsten.
I can go ahead. I can put on the next comment question from Orlando Gray. He says, when I was still an Orthodox Christian, quite similar to Catholic, we had kind of examination of conscience that was helpful in preparing for confession based on the 12 commandments that kind of helped reflection. I like that. That's actually really interesting. So yeah, anything that helps us to reflect. Thanks for the comment, Orlando, and for interacting. Leo, I'll turn it back over to you if your audio is working. It might not be, and that's okay, because this is...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there's a little bit of an echo.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, folks. Yep.
Yes. So Agnes has a question, but we'll be able to use the microphone. Would we, Daniel? Is that okay? Here we go.
Hi, Kirsten. You mentioned about the suicide being on all-time high right now, and I also heard about the search for therapy, psychotherapy. Do you think that I would say the time we are right now, or this generation that is seeking therapy, seeking this understanding of themselves, is something somewhat of a change in the world that we are right now, or at least in our society? Do you see something as a tool to assist in this internal analysis of moral values and all of that? I don't know if you can comment a little bit on that, if you think, what do you think about it?
So I think I had a little bit of trouble hearing Agnes. Leo, are you able to restate a little bit? It sounded like it was not the mic, but rather like the room audio.
You can say next to
So we're having issues with the audio then, Kirsten. So we'll pass that to another moment then. Um,
Okay.
I don't know if we would like to say your final comments about it and close up.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Um, the final thing I would have to say is that we are living in times of health and conscientiousness. Now more than ever in our society, we are looking for ways to be healthier, ways to be happier. And I would highly recommend all of us to dive into that 100%. And one of those ways can be feeding our souls. This particular book that we've been discussing and other spiritist books and spiritually uplifting books are a great way for us to feed our souls, but also for that deeper reflection that Joanna talked about. So never be afraid to begin again. And just again, thank you all for listening. I wish you all the best and God bless.